The views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the hosts and guests may or may not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Miami University. This is Reframe, the podcast from the College of Education, Health and Society on the campus of Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Burnout is becoming a serious problem that's rampaging through society like an invisible wildfire. In a new survey conducted by the job search company Indeed, more than half of workers now report feeling burned out, and over two-thirds say it's gotten worse since the pandemic. It seems as if no profession is safe, and burnout's often brought on by the kind of grind culture that can generate feelings of exhaustion, helplessness, cynicism, and an overall disengagement with our lives and jobs. And these are just some of the issues that concern Megan Kuykendoll. Megan is a certified family life educator and an expert on family resource management. She's also the new director of the Sexuality Education Study Center here at Miami University. And she's here today to talk about some of the dominant cultural values that perpetuate burnout, what happens to us when we constantly compare our best days to our everydays, and what we can actually start to do to create better work-life habits that help us become more sustainably minded. Megan Kuykendoll, welcome to the Reframe podcast.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
So before we begin, I want to tell a quick story about us trying to set up this conversation. This is actually the rescheduled conversation because we originally had a date set, and the night before we were supposed to record, there was news reports of potentially bad weather the next morning in Cincinnati, which is where I live, and there's quite a drive to get from there to our campus here in Oxford. And I was like, should I cancel? I don't know. And I ended up actually canceling the interview, and I felt so bad about it. All night I was like, just, letting people down or inconveniencing them. And I was like, just in the attempt to meet this phantom deadline that is in no way life or death, I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do? Just grind through and drive on potentially hazardous roads, putting myself and potentially others at risk, or at the very least, just dealing with all the stress of driving on unsafe road conditions, for no good reason. And if I can't pull back now, when I'm about to have a conversation about this very thing, when am I ever going to be able to do it? And I thought that related to exactly, what we're going to talk about.
Oh, totally. I mean, on a personal level, I love canceled plans. I love them so much. I think as my own little sort of respite or an accidental break that gives you that extra time because you don't really have the opportunity to then schedule something else, right? Mm-hmm. We have our scheduled plans and then something happens or something needs to move, all of those things, right? A lot of the things that we're doing are not truly life or death. These deadlines are not as hard as we make them out to be in our brains. And so then thinking about wow, I now have this whole hour. What does this look like? What do I get to do now? And trying not to just cram in more stuff, right? That's, at least my first inclination is really, okay, well, now I can do this project that I said no to before. Nope. Let's pull back for just a minute and say what really needs to happen? What is urgent, and what are those things that are going to kind of build my capacity to continue working? And then also thinking about, like you talked about, that anxiety of canceling on someone. It's such a big social pressure. But at the same time, the more that we do that, the easier it is for us to ask for what we need from each other, right? The more you can ask for what you need and make that space, the better all of our life quality and our work quality is going to be.
Can you talk about what it actually means to be burned out? I mean, I think that term is thrown around so much today. It's a big buzzword. People use it metaphorically or might exaggerate. It might, in a sense, lose all its meaning. It's used so often. Can you talk about what it actually means to be burned out?
In the situational time where we are, we're still kind of slogging through what this version of a pandemic looks like, recovering from some of the things that we've lost, people, opportunities, all kinds of things, right? And living under this low level of constant stress that sometimes peaks to significantly high levels, right? And so a lot of people are experiencing burnout or having more of a sense of what that actually means because of all of these other life stressors, right? So there are some clearer definitions that have been made to sort of get at that issue that you were mentioning with people just sort of throwing around the term. Mm-hmm. So the WHO has an article that talks about, their kind of disease categorization, but they highlight 3 specific things with burnout that are helpful to identify when you're thinking about, like, is this burnout or am I just kind of a little bit extra stressed? So certainly the first one that many of us are feeling for a variety of reasons is that feeling of exhaustion and depletion in our bodies, our minds, all of that. The next piece is, mental distance from your work. And part of that is that idea of stepping back or pulling back or not feeling as excited to do the work that you're doing, more prone to cynicism or negative feelings about the work that you're doing and the environment that you're working in. And again, there are many ways that you can feel those feelings without it being burnout, but thinking about this as one of those pieces. And then the last piece being reduced efficacy. So you're not as useful. You're not able to use your time. You're not as efficient. And so it's then, again, becoming even more frustrating to do the work because you're not able to do it at the capacity that you're used to doing it. And then you're more exhausted if you're spending more time on tasks and then continuing to feel frustrated at work. And all of those pieces sort of build on each other.
Yeah, that idea of it building on each other, I think is something I see in my life, and especially people I know. There's people I'm very close to where work is a big part of their identity, and I think in general it's a good thing. They find a lot of meaning and purpose on it, and they like to work, but they like to work so much that it leads to like exhaustion, and then they feel less productive. And then in order to make up for that lost productivity, they feel like they have to work twice as hard the next day, which leads to even more burnout, which leads to even less satisfaction. And it creates this like vicious cycle where I'm like, if you would just pull back a bit, take an actual real break and enjoy that downtime, you'd be able to come back with renewed energy and vigor and actually be more productive, which would make you happier. So it's almost like a win-win, but it creates this vicious cycle, which I think relates to something else I've heard you talk about, which is the spiral of doom. Can you talk about the spiral of doom? Is that the...
Yes, that's exactly it. So I kind of not affectionately, call it that for myself and with my students, just because I feel like that embodies the feeling that I have and that I think a lot of people kind of resonate with. You're spiraling down into something that is hard to get back out of. More formally and academically, people call it the exhaustion funnel. And really, it's where you are at a decreased capacity with the changes that you're making to help accommodate for whatever you're dealing with, right? So, okay, you have an extra project that you have to do and you don't get to take something else off of your plate to do that project. And so what do you sacrifice instead? Maybe you stay a little bit late and you don't cook yourself the kind of meal that makes you feel the best. Or you are home and you take care of some home things, and then before bed, you find yourself on your computer working on that project and staying up later than you would normally like. And so then that next day, you're a little bit more tired. Maybe your brain's a little bit foggier. You're less efficient, again, kind of going back to some of that burnout definition. Thinking about, okay, so it's harder for me to do this work. It's taking longer time for me to do this work. What else do I need to cut out? Well, maybe I'll just skip the gym today so that I can do this other thing or make up for this lost time. And so then again, all of those things that you're taking away are actually those behaviors and habits and practices that help you build capacity to do more work. When you are tired, when you are, not well nourished in terms of your food, or even thinking about food as an opportunity for community, when we think about the ways that we share food with other people and how that gives us some really good benefits in terms of our emotional well-being and health, when we start to cut those things out, we think that we're saving time for the stuff that we need to do, when in fact you end up reducing your overall capacity to do all of it. And so then you keep cutting more things out, and then all you've got left is work, and then you're sort of hating what you're doing because you don't have any more of that balance. You don't get to do the other things in your life that help you feel fulfilled and healthy and like you're happy with your life.
So how do we get here? What led to this grind culture? Well, it has a lot to do with the dominant cultural values and social pressures that are deeply embedded throughout society. It's almost become a badge of honor to brag about how much we work or how little free time we have. People talk about their side hustles, and not even as a lucrative hobby or as a bonus, but as an expected part of being productive after hours. Technology keeps us constantly connected to work or to the office anywhere, anytime. But in this endless effort to do more and to become better, we can also lose ourselves along the way. Megan, I wonder if this actually makes it hard for people to find the line or even to know what a good balance is. I mean, because, I often think like, well, I could have always done more. I could have given that draft another pass, or that project could have used another polish, or just another, I could always give an extra bit of time and do a little bit more. So it's kind of my fault if it's not as good as it was before or is as good as it could have been, and then you start to feel bad about that. But I wonder if at some point, do we get so far from a healthy baseline that we don't even remember what a healthy baseline is?
Yes. Oh, like you're explaining this and I'm like, yes, like all the time. We all have those little voices that are telling us, well, you didn't do enough, or you could have done a little bit more, or maybe if you had done more, then you would have insert whatever thing that you were working on or goal that you have. A lot of those messages are not coming from inside us, even though they feel like they are, because we live in a system that prioritizes work. And I also want to stress that our system prioritizes work that you get for money. Like, so you're doing something, some kind of activity, and you're receiving income, money, some sort of goods that you need, right? There are many, many other kinds of work that people do. We think about care work, taking care of family members, yourself, pets, home, all of those things, right? All of the ways that people contribute to their community environments that aren't for income, that tend to be devalued because it's not, the quote unquote work that everybody is trying to do to survive. And so when we think about, we have to put 110% in, but do we though? What is good enough? And so many of us have gotten to where we are from a very privileged perspective, certainly having access to higher education and family support and all of the things that have allowed me to be in academia where I am. But that environment continues to perpetuate that cycle of, well, you can always do a little bit more. Or what did you do now that makes you just a little bit better? And those questions aren't inherently bad. But when you are striving to get to that place, that feels like you're working 110%, no one should work 110%. That's too much, literally, numerically too much. If we're a whole human person and that's too much, something else is suffering in your life. And so thinking about how do we change some of those cultural expectations? But again, thinking what is a reasonable expectation and what is good enough? Good enough is such a better, healthier, in my opinion, way to frame things. Thinking about what is sustainable. Is this something that I can continue to do rather than the thing that I'm going to push myself and do this little extra and then I need a break? What would be the amount that you could do regularly where you wouldn't feel like you need a break? We all certainly enjoy vacations and things like that. I'm not saying that we should never take breaks. But if we're thinking about not being desperate for the weekend, not being desperate for a few days off, that can give us a better picture of what sustainable looks like for us. And it's a constant kind of reassessment. Mm-hmm. You can pick up on those indicators early. If you're finding yourself having more trouble getting out of bed or having trouble focusing on a task, that is a nice indicator earlier on to stop yourself from getting into that burnout cycle.
I do want to get back to what it may mean to have a sustainable mindset and how that might differ from just avoiding burnout. But you touched upon something that I think I struggle with, which is how do you know where that line is, even for yourself? Because, I often think, none of us have ever been the age we currently are. We're all living in a present that is constantly pushing up against the boundary of an unknown future. So, I've never been this age as an adult before, I know what it's like to be a 25-year-old, but there's no way I can know what it's like to be 70, without just the subjective experiences of others that I can't really truly understand until I'm there, right? So all of us are existing in this space we're in for the first time in moment-to-moment real life.
Yes.
So sometimes when I struggle with something, I'm like, is this just me? Am I somehow deficient or weak? Or is this just what it's like to be an adult now, Or is there truly something external from us that's off balance or that is spiraling me and others into this chaos level of burnout?
Yes. I love that framework. We are always living a day that has not been lived before for ourselves, right? You're a new person with different knowledge and different experiences going into every day. And so, yeah, your needs are going to change. And I think one of the main pieces that I think we tend to miss right now is space. We don't have the space. And I talk about space like not physical space, but like time, opportunity. Certainly some people can think about it as, meditative space and things like that. But really time to reconnect with yourself and to ask yourself those questions. Or even if it's hard to make that space, or you realize you're, flopping into bed and you have not had a moment where you could just connect with yourself and ask yourself how you're doing. I think that's one of the things that we can do from a small scale community level when we are greeting people and saying, oh, hi, how are you? Don't ask the question if you don't want to have the conversation, because I think it's important that we start to be a little bit more honest with our answers. Like, oh, fine, or oh, things are good. Like, that's great if that's true for you. But I have started to adopt this, like, I'm actually going to tell people if they ask me how I am, like, today's kind of hard, or we're just getting through it, and that's okay. I feel like it's another example of the ways that, we kind of shield others from our real experiences in a way that, people argue the same thing about, social media and Instagram lives and things like that, people are only showing you the best parts of their lives and not the real stuff.
I wonder if you can also talk about this other idea. It fits in with the dominant cultural values of what we're expected to have or to be or to do, which is society kind of demands that we have this emergency savings account of money in case something bad happens or an unexpected emergency. But there's no similar support network for having that same kind of emergency savings of time in case something similarly, goes awry and it requires our immediate attention. Can you talk about why we prioritize one or the other, or why it may be just as beneficial or not even, maybe even more beneficial to give ourselves that savings bank of time?
Yes. So a lot of people that do this work kind of talk about buffer time in your schedule, thinking about, not having things scheduled back to back, having in between time for at least the minimum of like going to the restroom and grabbing a bite to eat or a sip of water or something before you have to go to your next commitment. It's really important to have some of that room. But again, we're not in an environment that allows us to make that space, especially when we're thinking about hourly work, right? So you're being paid based on physically being somewhere, doing a specific thing for a certain number of hours. You're trying to be as efficient as possible with that time so that then you can take that money that you've earned from giving your time to spend that during your, free time outside of work. And with that, though, it sometimes makes the time that we're doing the work less enjoyable. So even if you're not looking at an hourly wage kind of job, thinking about what can actually make where I am in this present moment better. Do I need to take a quick walk outside and then come back? There's a reason that people have great ideas in the shower or on a walk or after having coffee with a friend. It allows your brain some room to breathe and process and make connections that you can't make just forcing yourself to sit at a desk and come up with that. And so back to that idea of having that savings account, that emergency fund of time, in some ways that is vacation time, that's sick time, things that are provided by your employer, but people don't often feel safe to use that. You'll see that in the statistics of all of the unused vacation days that people don't take because of that fear of not doing enough. If I take this vacation, then I'm not going to seem as serious. I'm not going to, be looked at for that next promotion or whatever that next thing is. So thinking about how we take the time that we have and making space, just like we were talking about with cancel plans, and it's so hard to cancel on somebody. We need to make that more normalized so that some of the shame, some of that, all of that internal dialogue of feeling like you can't cancel for something that you find valuable, we need to give ourselves space to do that. We need to be able to take our vacation days, take our sick time, and then within our larger systems, it can be hard to take those times because you have to do so much work to prepare for taking time off that it becomes not really worth it.
You have to do twice the work to buffer ahead to prepare, but then as soon as you come back, you have to do twice the work to catch up. So it's like, why even take the time off?
Yes. Same thing with sick days. And I've had this experience too, where you're just like, well, I'm just going to slog through it because it's easier to do it not feeling great than it will be to have to, work extra when I'm back. And ultimately that probably means we need more people to help share the load of work. If you cannot make room for a couple of sick days in your schedule and you can't accommodate that, then you need more of that buffer time. You need more of that, emergency fund of time. Mm-hmm. And that's hard because with something like a traditional financial model and having that emergency fund, that's seen as an individual responsibility to save that money as an individual so that you are prepared for an emergency, right? It is not always possible for us as individuals to develop a bank of time. When we're thinking about, sick time, vacation time, that's something that is provided by something outside of us. We certainly have control over some pieces of that. But again, thinking about some of those systems, having more in place where we are encouraged to have buffer. We see this, with creative companies, right? We see this a lot. That's kind of that stereotype with the tech company that, they have like ping pong tables and video games and coffee breaks and all this stuff. Like that time isn't not valuable. Like it is incredibly valuable for your work and creative productivity. You need those breaks to fuel that work. And we know that taking care of ourselves more holistically can help us to thrive in our overall health. And I want to also stress that I like to use the word health more expansively. We're not just talking about physical health, but we're talking about mental and emotional well-being too. Mm.
It's clear that burnout and grind culture can harm our professional and personal lives in obvious ways. But it can also be more nefarious than that and show up in surprising and unexpected ways as well. Megan, as the new director of the Sexuality Education Study Center, I imagine relationships, partnerships may also be affected as well, correct? Or what are some of the other maybe not so obvious ways that it can affect our lives?
I mean, absolutely. So thinking about the ways that burnout as a type of kind of extreme work-related stress, when you're saying no to those other opportunities, when you're not spending time with your partner, when you're not spending time with your kids, all of those things really kind of end up showing you that you haven't put in the time. Relationships take work and energy and effort just as much as they fulfill us in a lot of ways and can really fill us up. When we don't have time to spend there, or we're coming into a conversation with our partner about the daily business and you're already at that really high kind of stress load for the day, it's hard to be compassionate. It's hard to listen and be empathetic and work together and support the people in your life without snapping at them. Part of, what's interesting about some of the work out there on burnout, one of the books called Burnout, Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily and Amelia Nagoski, came out of a book that was written about sexuality and about trying to kind of better understand specifically people socialized as women and some of the stressors related to that, and being able to experience pleasure and have, fulfilling relationships. But a lot of what resonated with people who read that book was the burnout pieces. the ways that stress and being constantly depleted, being down at the bottom of that exhaustion funnel, really spiral of doom, it's hard to connect with other people. It's hard to feel desire. It's hard to be able to focus yourself on pleasure. And again, thinking about pleasure, not just as sexual pleasure, but many of the kinds of pleasure that we can have, a good cup of coffee or a good meal with people. So thinking about the ways that stress kind of can turn those pieces off for us, and that we're in that cycle of burnout in our work life and maybe unfulfilled in our work life, but it doesn't stay isolated there. We can see the spillover of that stress into our parenting relationships, our partnerships, our other family obligations and things like that, that we just don't have anything left to contribute when we've really limited our capacity and cut out those capacity building behaviors.
Yeah. You always hear, the job ruined our marriage, or I always thought that was a curious phenomenon. Like, how could that be? I guess that's how it happens.
Well, and that comes down to values, right? So another thing that comes up as part of talking about family resource management is really honing in on values. So we want to think about how our values affect our decision making, and are we actually recentering on those values before we make decisions, or are we using other things that guide those decisions? So even something thinking about like, okay, I need to work this hard or take on this extra project because I want to get this next promotion. Well, why do I want this next promotion? Is it the money? Is it the prestige? If those are things that you value or need, absolutely go for it. If you take that time and step back and say, I'm actually okay where I'm at. Like, maybe I don't need that extra if it means I'm not as stressed in this other area of my life, where I have more time to go get out on the water, at the lake in the weekends or something like that. Or have more time for walks and playing with my kids and not feeling like I have to be attached to my phone for emails. There are lots of benefits about certain kinds of work environments that we don't always see when we're so focused on the dollars.
My wife actually started scheduling in time to go hiking. As a part of her week, this is when I go outside now.
Absolutely. Pick a thing that will help you feel rejuvenated when you have that time. And again, scheduling that time in is such a great tip. When it's on your calendar, it feels a little bit more important than if you just have it mentally on your to-do list.
All right, so there's a clear tip, schedule it in. But there's also this idea of not even getting to the point of burnout in the first place, which touches on what you call becoming sustainably minded. So is there a difference between simply avoiding burnout versus actually becoming sustainably minded? Like, what's the difference, and what are some other tips that people can do to become sustainably minded?
Absolutely. So I think a lot of times we are focused on avoiding the bad thing that we don't want to happen, right? We think about that with the way that we promote health behaviors and things like that. We're trying to avoid a certain outcome rather than thinking about what you want to look forward to or what your goal actually is, instead of it's just not this other thing. And so a lot of times, we get focused on, well, how do I not be burned out? But really, how can I make this more sustainable is a question that gives us more of that what we're looking forward to rather than trying to get away from. And so thinking about sustainability, building time into your schedule, having buffer, trying not to schedule yourself back to back. And that takes adjustment depending on your work culture, certainly. There are things like, maybe you schedule 45-minute meetings instead of an hour meetings. That sort of helps everyone know that you're trying to have some time between your next thing. Or you fill out less times on the doodle poll for when you're available to meet, even though technically you could, but maybe something else needs to go there in your schedule. And then saying no. Saying no is something that we all need to be a little bit more comfortable with, and is really, really hard to do. Again, thinking about, what are our goals? How do I want people to view me? I want to be seen as this, really great collaborative team member, but you can't be that great collaborative team member if you've overstretched yourself so that you then can't follow through on the commitments that you've made to that team. So thinking about saying no, or even asking the question, if I'm going to take this on, what do I need to remove from my existing obligations? Is a really good question to help us reframe how we use our time and making sure that we're not overwhelming ourselves. And a lot of times, too, it can be hard to say no because the things we're being asked to do might be something you're really passionate about and that you have a lot of that personal inspiration to be involved with. And then I encourage, people to think about, if this is something I care about so much, am I going to actually be able to give it the energy and the time it deserves? Or if I delay working on this or do this in a different way, will it result in a better outcome? So again, thinking about the short-term and long-term goals, getting back to those values and deciding, is this something I can afford to say yes to? Again, using that financial vocabulary, but thinking about it with time and energy. Can I afford to give this time? Can I afford to give this energy to this task or project? And if I can't, is the answer no? Or is it, I can do this if I don't do this other thing?
Great. Well, I think this is a really important topic. I don't think there's a single person in my life that's not dealing with this on at least some level.
Yes. So many things all the time and very little space to actually think about what you want to do and how to handle it.
Well, thank you so much for being here to talk about it.
Thank you.
Megan Kuykendoll is a certified family life educator and an expert on family resource management, and she's also the new director of the Sexuality Education Study Center here at Miami University. And we'll put more resources in the show notes in case you or anyone you know is currently suffering from or experiencing burnout. And thank you so much for listening to the Reframe podcast. We have many more episodes available wherever podcasts are found.